Okay, I'll call this to order. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mayor Richard Stewart, and on behalf of City Council, I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to this public hearing. It's a public hearing into the bylaws that will be introduced to you in a moment by the City Clerk. Council for the City of Coquitlam has given first reading to these bylaws and has directed that a public hearing be held. And it will work this way. Staff from the City's Planning and Development Department will present a summary of the proposed bylaw on the floor, and then we will open the floor to anyone in attendance that wishes to make his or her views known on the proposed bylaw. Those that have pre-registered will be given the first opportunity to speak, and then after that we'll open the floor. I stress to all of you that this is a public hearing. It's an opportunity for anyone who has a view on the proposed bylaws to make that view known to council members. Council members are here with an open mind and are here to listen to your input. None of us has prejudged the outcome of these applications, but council has asked that I set out the rules for the public hearing. It's not a question and answer period. It's not an opportunity to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with either council members, staff, or those in the audience who may be opposed to your particular point of view. I ask that you restrict your comments to the proposed bylaw, that you be as brief and concise as possible. We ask speakers to limit themselves to a 5-minute time limit. You can use more than one of those 5 minutes, but you got more good stuff. You get to the back of the line, and we want everyone that wants to speak to have an opportunity to speak at least once. I ask that the audience be respectful of each speaker and allow that speaker to make his or her views known without interruption. And to that end, we ask that you please refrain from clapping, from cheering, from booing during any presentation made this evening. As chair of this hearing, I reserve the right to conclude any presentation that doesn't relate to the bylaw, that becomes abusive, or becomes repetitive of views that the speaker has already made known to council members. Please note, if you wish to provide a written submission, any of your notes, for example, you want it to be included in the permanent record of the meeting, you must hand that submission to the clerk's desk prior to the adjournment of the related item on the agenda. Once we adjourn an item, legally we cannot receive any further information about that until that item is disposed of, either voted in favor, given fourth reading, or rejected. Immediately following adjournment of the public hearing tonight, we have a regular council meeting that will convene in order that council can give consideration to items on the public hearing agenda as well as some items on the council agenda. However, if during the public hearing council requests further information related to an item or asks that it not be considered tonight, consideration of that item will be deferred pending receipt of the requested information. I will now call on Mr. Gilbert to introduce the bylaws on tonight's agenda and Planning and Development staff to make a presentation on the first item.
Thank you, Your Worship. First item this evening is an application to amend the City of Coquitlam zoning bylaw in order to rezone the property at 1733 Brunette Avenue from RS1 one-family residential to RT1 two-family residential. This is bylaw number 4685.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Chris Jarvie, Acting Supervisor of Development Planning. As Mr. Gilbert said, item 1 is for 1733 Brunette Avenue. The property is located on the north side of Brunette Avenue, which is double fronting with Sheridan Avenue to the north. It's between Paray Court and Laurentian to the west. Currently, the property is zoned RS1 and designated neighbor detached residential in the official community plan. The proposal is to subdivide the property into two 10-meter wide lots with access proposed from Sheridan Avenue to the north. Staff's recommendation is that council grant second, third, and fourth and final readings to bylaw 4685.
Thank you. We have two speakers registered, beginning with the applicant owner, which is Graham De La Font.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Graham LaFond, 1733 Brunette Avenue. I've owned 1733 Brunette Avenue for over 28 years. One of the tasks that I performed after I received notice of the public hearing was to walk around the neighborhood and knock on doors. I knocked on 63 doors. Results were 2 not answering, 2 negative views, and 59 residents were in favor of the rezoning of the subdivision into 2 lots. Included in my visits to the south was Booth Avenue, north of Glendale, east all of Pear Court, and west down to 1676 Brunette. I have, like I said, I received a couple that were undecided, 1 opposed, and 4 no answers, and that's what I've got to say.
Thank you. Councillor Marsden.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to say I wish I got your results, door knocking and campaign. 63 doors and only 4 didn't answer. That's pretty impressive. A question for the applicant. With regards to the site itself, it's different in that it fronts Brunette as well as Sheridan. It's not a lane that will provide access to parking in the carriage home. Can you give any indication of frontage improvements that you're going to have on facing Sheridan?
Yeah, on Sheridan, there's a slight slope. I've used back Sheridan access since I've owned the property, and so we'll probably end up doing the same thing as grading it down to that elevation. Our lots are a little bit longer than the normal lots. It's 148 feet deep, so it will give lots of room for off-street parking. And being that Sheridan is 66 feet wide, it does give us access to come off of Sheridan.
Okay.
Readily parking on our own property.
Okay, so there's no parking on the south side of Sheridan at that point, so there's concrete barriers there. You'll be removing those and grading downward, or is that?
I don't think that I'll be able to remove those, and I think that's something to do with the creek. I'd have to talk to engineering on that, but I presume we will have to just go the present access, which is on Sheridan, and then the actual barriers are about 30 feet back from the edge of the road, and that's where they have the access to the storm sewers there. There's actually a big manhole there, and so we would be able to grade that and then come into our own property.
Thank you. So then perhaps through the chair to staff, with regards to the frontage along Sheridan and the concrete blocks that are there at this particular point in time, do we foresee there being sufficient room in there for 2 driveways? That it be is there some sort of agreement where there be a single driveway coming off and splitting off to the 2 homes, or?
Thank you. Through the chair. The proposal is for 2 driveways, and they would need a retaining wall at either end to deal with the transition to the neighboring properties.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
I've got a question to staff. I'm trying to picture, well, this becomes a 33-foot lot, and a 33-foot lot is a pretty tight lot for 3 cars of parking. And in this case, it would be 3 cars of parking across the front road frontage that isn't a lane frontage, it's a street frontage. So what is how far back are they set back from the street, the front property line? Those sorts of issues. There isn't a site plan, of course. Guides us in any way as to how they would lay it out. Mr. Jarvie.
Thank you, Your Worship. As part of the subdivision, should Council grant final readings tonight to the bylaw, the subdivision committee would be looking to ask the applicant for a concept on how they plan on developing that back to accommodate the 3rd parking spot. Ideally, we'd be asking for the garage to be recessed further back on the property so they have sufficient room to flare out that driveway to get the 3rd parking stall, assuming that they want to add a secondary suite or carriage house. So We'll work with the applicant through the subdivision process to verify that they can fit all 3 required parking spots on property.
Well, I think they can fit them. I just can't imagine that that's a street frontage that I'd like to see repeated all the way up the road. Because the folks on the north side of Sheridan, their front door will be facing a row of garage doors, I guess. Is that, well, I guess two-car garages and a one-car pad, typically on 33s. Mr. Jarvie.
Correct. In a normal, typical 33-foot wide, 10-meter wide lot, where you have a rear lane, you'd have a rollover curb, and typically the 3 parking stalls would be side by each to get the 3 parking stalls across the property. As part of this, because there is such a sufficient amount of depth in the property, we'd be looking to make sure that the garages were recessed back so it wasn't just a row of garage doors at Sheridan Street. And so we'd be able to ensure that you could get the 3rd parking spot on site and in an unencumbered fashion.
So we would set it back so that it's similar to a front yard setback,
That is correct, yes.
except that it would be a 2-car garage and a carriage home.
Assuming the applicant opts for that, they would be able to get a secondary suite instead if they wanted to go that route.
Okay, because given that we have sufficient depth, I would have preferred a subdivision that went front to back. I don't know what, I can see why they might apply if they're heading toward carriage home, why they could end up with 2 units with 2 carriage homes instead of just 2 units with 2 basement suites. But a front to back subdivision would produce 2 75-foot deep lots by 60, which is it's much more conforming with the streetscape on both Sheridan and Brunette.
It appears as though the lots are just shy of being able to be subdivided front and back. They would need 22.7 meters, which they're just short of. As well, Brunette Avenue at that point is an arterial street, and we'd discourage a driveway access onto that.
Except that all the other houses have driveway access onto Brunette. Okay, I know this one. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Reid.
I was going exactly where you are. How short are they? It wouldn't be the first time we've ever had a variance. Like, I mean, how short are they from putting one facing Sheridan and one facing Brunette?
About 17 centimeters.
Oh, so it's not workable at all then. So it's about that far.
You know, I'm just looking at the neighborhood here, and there's still homes, lovely homes, it looks like, on Sheridan. So why we couldn't do, as the mayor said, and I think too, a front to back. So I have, I think 33 with all that driveway isn't going to be as attractive as going front to back. So thank you.
So it would, and in fairness, it would require the 2 changes. One of them was permission to use a front driveway on Brunette, and the second one on a 2-lane version section of arterial.
But Your Worship, we have front driveways on Brunette now, and it's going to be 20 years before they go. So
I get it, and this one will be 60 years before it goes if we did. And I'm just saying that those are the 2 changes we would need, and one is that to that policy. Variance from that policy, and one is the variance of half of 17 centimeters. Any further discussion on this related to this speaker? No? Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. So the item in front of us tonight is public hearing on a rezoning request from RS1 one-family residential to RT1 two-family residential. Would this zoning, the RT1 two-family residential, work for either of the options that this council has been discussing right here, the front-to-back subdivision or the long ways splitting in half, would the same zoning apply regardless?
Yes, the RT1 zone would apply, and presumably a front and back would also work in terms of what the lot area requirement is, because the lot is quite large. So it could be either subdivision could be accommodated, assuming that council also was willing to grant a variance to reduce the lot depth by the required amount.
Okay, so going forward, if and when we get to discuss this at council, we should make sure we concentrate on the zoning and then the side issue of how we want it developed. But right now, it's the land use that's in front of us, and I want us to, and I'm going to continue to focus on the land use. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zerillo.
I just had a question about the street frontages then. So this does relate to land use, because we need to understand on any configuration, if we do a front-to-back configuration, does that mean that the owner is responsible for 2 street frontage improvements? And if we do the perpendicular, like we're looking at right now, they would only be required to do 1 street frontage?
Mr. Jarvie.
Thank you. Through the chair, regardless of whether it was a front and back or side by side, the applicant is required to do frontage improvements, which would include both Sheridan as well as Brunette Avenue.
So what would those street frontages improvements look like? Because I don't think I've seen one before where we're not looking at road alley. This one we're looking at 2 roads. So what does the frontage need to look like on both sides?
Mrs. Jarvie.
If the clerk can put on the click share, I can punch up the servicing concept here and show. So, not quite reflecting what I'm actually showing.
There you go.
All right, so along this Sheridan Avenue, you can see there's going to be a flare out to widen out the concrete, as well as the 2 driveway crossings and the sidewalk at that frontage. If we look down at the Brunette, again, similar, we'll see a flare out of the pavement to widen the actual pavement width, as well as redoing the sidewalk and a separated sidewalk.
Great. Sorry, can we look at where the garages are again?
So,
Your Worship, if I could, the servicing drawing that's been up on the screen right now showing the accesses off Sheridan at the back, don't be confused. That doesn't show garage locations. The actual garages could be well within the lots. These lots have got a pretty generous depth, as Mr. Jarvie was noting. I would just, if council is interested in exploring the front and back subdivision approach, I would want to take that back to just look at the feasibility and technical viability of that. Certainly, council can want to give readings to the bylaw. It's certainly council's ability, but I just caution a little bit on changing a subdivision layout on the fly, so to speak, and there may be some other technical factors that should be taken into consideration. Like, for example, I think there's a bit of a grade difference coming up off of Brunette Avenue and how that would be accommodated. What is set in place with this lot here, there's other lots along that stretch of Brunette, and you'd be compounding the number of driveways likely over time. So I think we just want to take that back and have a look at, so we can give you some technical factors to be aware of if ultimately that was the direction council wanted to go.
Thank you. And then I just had one other question, and it relates to turnaround. I remember seeing something like this before where the first person to subdivide that was towards the back of the alley had to turn around in their driveway, but I'm looking that this is what, 20 meters or something, so maybe it's big enough that we don't need a turnaround. But I did want to ask the question. How do cars turn around when they reach the end there? Because I think there's a creek, so there's no crossover to get into Perry Court. So how does a car turn around if they accidentally go down Sheridan?
Through your worship, the engineering department has looked at this, and for all practical purposes, there's going to be potentially one more driveway access to that very end of the roadway. And so potentially one more vehicle would need to be turned around. But quite frankly, given that it's kind of end of the road, we are not concerned about it. There are driveways or driveway sections which are within the public road right away, and safely the turning movement can be accommodated. I also would like to note that currently concrete barriers or similar are blocking the easterly end of Sheridan Avenue, and the engineering department at this point has no plans to change that situation. So access to Brunette will remain just like today from Laurentian Crescent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I hate to ask. We put the servicing drawing back up. How much width are we anticipating? I hate to get into the detail here, but I recognize that we're here for land use and that the land use is accommodatable in both cases, and that I am similarly reluctant to change the proposal on the fly. I would want to have an analysis done, but I'm uncomfortable with the proposed land use decision only because of the 6 cars of parking that are across the frontage on Sheridan. So that's affecting my decision on land use. And I offered one way perhaps that it might be mitigated, but I recognize that creates challenges. And now I'm asking, I gather we're widening both Sheridan's pavement and Brunette's pavement. Brunette already has a separated sidewalk, so I'm wondering about that element of it. Can Mr. Diozegi or someone enlighten us as to whether we're redirecting sidewalks or we're actually connecting the new sidewalk with a street to walk on because there's no sidewalk? And this at the Sheridan side, and I'll ask the same question when we get to the Brunette side.
Your Worship, I attempt to start the answer. When it comes to us as a subdivision application, we need to follow the subdivision and development servicing bylaw requirements. Sheridan Avenue is a local low-density road. The existing road right-of-way is 20 meters, and as such, no additional road right-of-way dedication is required. With the developments, we need to ask for the upgrade of the frontage to the ultimate standard, which would have to accommodate 8.5 meter pavement width, a 2.2 meter boulevard, and the 1.5 meter sidewalks in addition to the 0.75 meter utility strip. So the current configuration doesn't meet this, therefore the upgrade is required. On Brunette, the road classification is a modified city arterial with bike route, meaning that a future total of 21 meter right-of-way will be required. The current right-of-way width is only 20 meters. To upgrade the frontage to the current full standards, that will accommodate 10.6 meter pavement width, which is twice 3.5 meter travel lanes, twice 1.8 meters bike lanes, 2.2 meter boulevards, 2.3 meter sidewalks, and the 0.7 meter utility strip. So if you look at the future ultimate standard of this roadway, if we are working towards, as we should, this is the requirement to upgrade both frontages.
Thank you. Okay. Our second speaker on this item, right before it is David Warren. Mr. Warren, if you could give your address for the record.
Yes. Thanks for having me, Council. Appreciate it. I live at 1745 Sheridan Avenue. My wife and I have owned and lived at that location for the past 30 years. And I support Mr. Lafon's redevelopment of the site, certainly, but only to RS1. And I would have to say that most of the argument against amending to RT1 center around access, egress, and parking to the property as well as the surrounding neighborhood. By way of background, he actually had a photograph of Sheridan up there. It was interesting to note that it's not a road or a street. It's a dead-end lane, virtually. At the eastern end at Perry Court, there's bullards with a chain across that prevent access to Perry Court. No sidewalks, no turnaround. My neighbor to the east on the north side, I'm on the north side, he is the turnaround. And the roadway is particularly narrow. From my, maybe, do you have amendment number, attachment number 4 we could put on the screen by any chance? Through the chair? From my 1745 Sheridan across the street, that's 6 meters asphalt curb to asphalt curb, 6 meters. There is zero shoulder on the south side. That's where the concrete barriers are. And there's a 2.5 meter gravel shoulder on the north side for a total of 8.5 meters average. And at this point, like I said, attachment number 4 refers to Sheridan Avenue as 20.1 meters of road. Is that, am I reading that correct? So they're showing it the same width as Brunette Avenue? Something wrong with that. Yeah, something wrong with that.
That's the amount of space that's between the property lines. It's not the amount that's paved.
Yeah, but if we're talking about comparing Sheridan to Brunette, it's, yeah.
The road allowance is the same width.
Right.
And that's the case for most streets are pretty close to that.
Yeah, I just wonder, like, if that's a primary concern in the change of zoning, then we should be dealing with reality rather than not. The parking requirement discussed in the analysis talks about 6, total of 6, 3 per lot. I think that's rather lean from what I've seen in most people's driveways these days. So there's going to be there has to be some accommodation for parking on Brunette or Sheridan. One would think there's a couple of vehicles extra, I would say. So based on the current road conditions, I don't think we can absorb another 2 cars on Sheridan. And should be noted that Booth Creek has a historical flood situation. In the past 30 years, it's flooded 3 times, once every 10 years, basically. And that was the result of, or that's why the concrete barriers were put in, to mitigate some of that. And I wonder if the historical flooding of Booth Creek was taken into consideration in rezoning to multifamily from single family. The end result being even worse with multifamily when that flood takes out that lot. The last time it flooded, it took out 2 residences on the south side, quite substantially. I don't know what the dollar value of the damage was, but it was very high, very high. So I just wondered if that was considered in the rezoning process as well. And but in closing, I'd like to say that based on the current state of Sheridan Avenue and in the absence of any further information on upgrading the current state, I would suggest with respect that there's reasonable argument against RT1. That's it. Any questions?
I see none. Thank you very much, David.
Yep. Thanks, Reggie.
Good to see you again, too. Haven't seen you in years.
That's it.
Are there any other speakers to this item? Are there any other speakers to this item? The third and final time, are there any other speakers to this item? You can, I'll just see, are there any other speakers? Any other speakers? No? Come forward, sir.
Graham LaFawn, 1733 Brunette. Yes, I see council has made a couple suggestions on the property. One of them is, like I said, Brunette is 20 meters wide, and Sheridan also, and the barriers are where they are. But is there any reason why we cannot make those barriers wider, as facilitate Mr. Warren with his concerns? When it's flooded, my property has never really been hit too bad. That's where my home is anyhow. I know farther down Sheridan, they've been flooded out numerous times. But I think that the city now has resolved a lot of that. The most recent, couple of years ago, when they kind of upgraded that storm sewer, some concern, they've kind of promised us that that won't happen again. I think that was more of a error that they missed cleaning out the grates there on the creek. And there also is that diversion that goes over to Popeye Creek that I think that they've dealt with that a little better this time also. So that, as far as the flood, I think that the engineer department upgraded that in the last couple of years. And as far as I think the council has rezoned a number of different places at 33-foot lots, and some of them, like on Edgar Avenue, it's very narrow alleyways, and yet actual garages are just right at the property line. We're very close to it, so I'm not sure where they get their parking from also. But they've passed, and those are 33-foot lots also. Any questions?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll ask one last time. Are there any other speakers to this item? Any at all? Anyone? I'll declare that. Councillors,
I'm going to take the chance to ask about the flooding. So I live up the hill, and I actually know some people that rent along Brunette, and there was some things traveling down last year or the year before, and I did see that the city was out doing work on Perret as well as Brunette. But can engineering maybe let us know what changes have been done to the sewer systems there, or to make sure that the water doesn't flood along that corridor, even all the way to the Laurentian?
Through the chair, most certainly. To start with, the city of Coquitlam is split up into several zones when it comes to flood protection, and we maintain a list of critical infrastructure in this regard. When the weather forecast indicates heavier than usual rainfall events coming our way, 2 or 3 days prior to the event, we methodically visit these sites and clean the inlets, making sure that everything is as well maintained as physically possible. In addition to, sometimes it happens that, particularly when we have already oversaturated soils and the rainfall comes down with higher intensity, debris can come down in natural channels extremely rapidly, and that can still block inlet structures, causing flooding damages. Now, in order to minimize this risk, what we do is we actually, again, methodically analyze our culverts and make sure that where the existing culvert doesn't meet the design requirements, then we incorporate it into our 5-year capital plan and make sure that from time to time those culverts are replaced or improved. And obviously we can do that overnight, but over a number of years we've made quite a bit of success in this regard. So we have, I believe, less and less flooding issues in the city.
Okay, but for this one specifically, for some reason I remember seeing work being done around the creek there over the last year and a half or so. Do you remember if the culverts have been changed or?
I don't have a recollection of the culvert. It's that the culvert would have been changed itself, but I know that we did some inlet work in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do it again. Are there any other speakers to this item? Anybody at all? Any other speakers? Last time. I'll declare this item closed. Mr. Clerk. Oh, right.
I'll be
Councillor Hodge.
I'll be excusing myself from this next item as I have a shared financial interest in this property. Thank you.
Okay. Under the provisions of legislation, a member of council can excuse himself, must excuse himself if the matter could be considered a conflict of interest, and Councillor Hodge has excused himself. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 2 is an application to amend the zoning bylaw in order to rezone the property at 1373 Glenbrook Street from RS2 one-family suburban residential to RS8 large village single-family residential and RS11 estate single-family residential. This is bylaw number 4689.
No, we're in a public hearing.
Public hearing.
Yes, yes, in about an hour. Mr. Jarvie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening once again. Item 2, it's 1373 Glenbrook Street. It's a proposed subdivision. The property is located on the east side of Glenbrook Street near the intersection of Millard and Marguerite. Again, it's another double fronting lot with frontage on Glenbrook as well as Marguerite. The OCP designation on the property is estate single family on the western half and large village single family on the eastern half. Currently, the property is zoned RS2 suburban residential. The proposal is to subdivide the lot into 5. There'll be 4 lots fronting along Marguerite, and the remaining house will remain on the larger lot fronting along Glenbrook Street on the west. Staff recommend that Council grant second, third, and fourth reading to bylaw 4689, 2016.
Thank you. I don't have a speakers list here. No. Thank you.
No registered speakers.
Thank you. Are there any speakers to this item? Are there any speakers to this item? Councillor Zarrillo.
I just had a question about at Marguerite and Millard, I guess. I believe there's a stop sign like right there. Is there going to be any changes to the traffic flow at that corner, Millard and Marguerite, or will it remain the same configuration? Is it a three-way stop, or what is the?
Mr. Jarvie on the question of a stop sign.
Thank you. There'd be no change to the traffic flow at Millard and Marguerite. The street would be widened out.
Yeah, that's what I was seeing, yeah.
Yeah, to be an 8.5 meter roadway. So it would be a kind of a three-legged intersection there.
So still a three-way stop? Or no stop north to south?
I don't believe there'll be a stop sign on Marguerite. It'll be for Millard.
Okay, I'm just wondering, because I see it is going to change the configuration of the road. Okay. So just one stop sign?
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you.
Now, there is currently a stop sign southbound on Marguerite,
So what do we see?
according to Google Earth.
Pretty sure there's one there. I've stopped there.
Yep, there it is. Yep. And that's, and yes, there's one, there is a three-way stop now.
Okay, so we're keeping the three-way stop even with the road widening then? If it goes through?
No. Because of the way it's configured, there may be good reasons to have a three-way stop until the road is widened, but I'll look to. That's
what I'm wondering.
Mr. Diozegi if he has a preconceived notion of this, or whether that would wait until the road is widened for a determination.
Mayor Stewart, I have a little bit of a technical difficulty here, but what I can safely say is that the proposed subdivision will not fundamentally change the traffic volumes and the traffic flows in the neighborhood. Therefore, I do not anticipate any changes to the currently existing traffic control at that particular intersection.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, are there any speakers to this item? Any speakers to this item? The third and final time, are there any speakers to this item? Councillor Towner.
I have a quick.
I just want to let council know that you can ask questions at first, when I asked that the first time.
Yeah, sorry. I just have a question. It says that this went to the Board of Variance on June 28th. Was that variance approved?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was.
Okay. And we got an email about the trees. Will any of the trees be able to remain, or will they all have to come down?
Mr. Jarvie.
Thank you. Through your worship, the trees along Marguerite Street were surveyed by the applicant, and due to the road widening and the location of the proposed homes, there was no trees that were deemed worthy for protection. So the trees along Marguerite will be removed. The applicant will be required to adhere to the tree replacement requirements of the zoning bylaw that apply northeast, as well there would be a requirement for street trees along Marguerite as well. So there will be a significant number of trees being replanted on that street frontage.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep. Any other speakers to this item? Any speakers to this item? Third and last time. Any speakers to this item? Declare this item and the public hearing closed.